The frozen wind screamed across the barren land, shaking the fabric of the small tent, making it rattle like it might fly away at any moment. The night was darker than any human city had ever known. The sky covered in thick clouds, hiding even the stars. Snow fell in heavy sheets, piling against the thin shelter. Inside, one man sat alone, wrapped in his jacket, teeth pressing together as he fought the endless cold. His name was Daniel, a soldier stranded on this frozen alien world. After a mission went wrong, the storm had swallowed his squad. He had survived by luck, by crawling into this battered tent and waiting for the storm to pass. But tonight the temperature was falling so low that even his heater was failing. He hugged himself tightly, listening to the howl of the wind. He thought he was the only living soul left in this wasteland. Until he heard a faint cry carried by the storm. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks, but then he heard it again, a weak, broken sound. Someone was out there, struggling against the storm. His instincts told him to stay put, to protect what little warmth he had left, but his heart refused. He pulled his jacket tighter, shoved his boots into the snow, and unzipped the tent flap. The cold hit him like knives, cutting through every layer of clothing. Still, he pushed forward, snow stinging his face. Narrowed against the storm. There, half buried in the snow, was a small figure, delicate, trembling. The faint glow of her skin told him she was no human, an alien girl. Her body curled in on itself, her breaths shallow and fast. She looked ready to die. Daniel dropped to his knees, brushing snow off her face. Her skin burned cold beneath his hands. Her lips moved as if to whisper, but no sound came out. Without thinking, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile, as if she might break apart. The storm fought him every step back to the tent, but he gritted his teeth and pushed on. His boots slipped in the ice. The wind nearly tore the girl from his arms. But finally, he stumbled through the tent flap and dropped to his knees on the floor. Inside, the air was only slightly warmer. His small heater buzzed weakly, giving off little heat. He laid her down on his blanket, covering her with everything he had. Still, she shivered violently, her eyes fluttering open. She gasped softly, pupils glowing faintly in the dim light. Fear filled her gaze when she saw him. She tried to push him away, but her strength was gone. "Don't move," he said quietly. "You'll freeze to death out there." His voice was firm but gentle. She blinked at him, her lips trembling, and finally whispered, "Why? Why help me? Human." The word human came out sharp, like an insult. Daniel didn't flinch. He pressed his hands against her shoulders, trying to keep her still under the blanket. "Because no one deserves to die in the snow," he answered. His words made her eyes widen, but she quickly looked away. Her people had left her here, abandoned her to the storm. She could not understand why this stranger, an enemy, would save her. The tent was small, barely big enough for one. Now with the two of them, it felt even smaller. Their breath filled the cold air in pale clouds. Daniel's jacket was soaked with snow, his skin numb. He knew the only way to save her was warmth. Real warmth. Slowly, carefully, he lay beside her under the blanket, letting his body heat press against hers. She stiffened at the closeness, her heart racing. But after a moment, the shivering eased. Silence filled the tent, broken only by the shriek of the storm outside. Daniel stared at the thin fabric above them, wondering what tomorrow would bring. He had no plan, no way off this world, but for now, his mission was simple: keep her alive through the night. Her voice broke the silence, weak but steady. "If they find me, they will kill me. And you too." She closed her glowing eyes, as if expecting him to throw her back into the snow. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand rested on the blanket near hers. "Then they'll have to get through me first." Her breath caught confusion and fear mixing on her face. For the first time since she was abandoned, she felt something strange, something new. It wasn't safety from her own people, and it wasn't trust yet, but it was the first spark of hope. The storm raged louder, snow piling higher outside, but in that fragile shelter, two strangers shared a warmth neither of them expected. The frozen night was far from over, and danger was only beginning. Yet, in that single tent, something had already started to change forever. The storm did not end. It only grew sharper. The wind cutting like blades against the thin walls of the tent, Daniel had given most of his warmth to her. And now both of them lay close under the single blanket, the air heavy with frost, when her eyes opened again. Faint light shimmered within them. Like starlight trapped in glass, she looked at him with suspicion. Her small body tense, she shifted away slightly, pressing herself against the far corner. "Too close," she whispered, her voice thin. The tent was so small that even with her pressed against the fabric, she could still feel his heat. He raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said, "but if you go back outside, you'll freeze before you take 10 steps. Her gaze lingered on him, her breathing uneven. She had been taught all her life that humans were dangerous, selfish, and cruel. Yet here he was, sharing his last heat with her. She clutched the blanket tightly, as if holding on to both comfort and fear. He pulled out a tiny stove from his pack. The last bit of fuel he had saved. The blue flame flickered weakly, but it was enough to melt snow in a small pot. Steam filled the tent, and he passed the warm container toward her. She stared at it suspiciously before sipping. The heat rushed into her body, making her close her eyes with relief. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her lips trembling. At last she whispered, "Leora." The word was soft, fragile, like something secret she had never wanted to share. Daniel nodded. "I'm Daniel." She hugged the blanket closer. "Why save me, Daniel?" The way she spoke his name carried both wonder and fear. "My people leave behind those who cannot fight, those who are weak or unwanted. We are told it is the way of survival." Her voice cracked, her glowing eyes filling with something close to shame. Daniel shook his head, anger in his tone. "Where I come from, we don't abandon people. We fight to keep them alive, no matter how hard it gets." His words made her flinch. As if they were too bright, too heavy, she turned her face away. Hiding tears, silence fell again. The storm's scream the only sound. Daniel leaned back, exhausted. His muscles ached from dragging her out of the snow. His eyelids felt heavy, but he forced himself awake. Watching her, she was still trembling, and he knew the thin blanket was not enough. He sighed and shifted closer, letting his body heat reach her again. This time, she did not push him away. Her shivering slowed, her breathing steadied. For a long while, they listened to the storm together, two strangers pressed together by fate. Then came the sound. Faint but chilling footsteps crunching in the snow outside. Daniel's hand instinctively reached for his weapon. His eyes met hers, and she froze in terror. Her lips barely moved as she mouthed the words, "They are searching for me." The shadows moved outside the tent, their voices low and harsh. Leora gripped his sleeve, her glowing eyes wide with fear. Daniel steadied his breathing, every muscle ready. If they opened the tent flap now, there would be no time for questions. Only fight or death. The storm roared on. But inside the tent, the real danger had just begun. The fire hissed inside the tiny stove, its weak blue flame throwing flickers of light against the canvas walls. Daniel sat cross-legged, carefully slicing the last of his ration bar into 2 uneven halves. He pushed the larger piece toward Leora, but she only stared at it, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. "You eat," she said softly, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Humans don't share." Daniel gave a dry laugh. Guess I missed that lesson. He set the food in front of her anyway, then leaned back. Chewing his smaller half with slow bites, hunger gnawed at his belly, but he ignored it. Watching as Leora finally reached for the ration, her thin hands trembled as she lifted it. Like she still didn't believe it was really hers. The warmth of the stove mixed with their breath, fogging the air inside the small space. Outside, the storm howled, its icy fingers clawing against the tent walls. Inside, a different kind of storm stirred fear, suspicion, and something else that neither of them could name yet. Leora chewed carefully, her glowing gaze never leaving him. At last, she whispered, "My people threw me out. They said I was unfit. I was weak. I could not fight like the others. To them, my life was worth nothing." Daniel clenched his jaw, the words cutting deeper than the cold outside. "They abandoned you." His voice carried disbelief and anger. She nodded, eyes downcast. "It is our law. Those who cannot fight are only a burden." He shook his head, leaning forward. "On Earth, it's different. We don't leave the weak to die. We protect them because they're still family." "Still human?" He stopped himself, then added, "Still alive." Her eyes widened slightly. Shimmering in the firelight, no one had ever spoken to her like that for the first time. She wondered if maybe she wasn't worthless, if maybe her life could matter to someone. The silence stretched long, filled with the crackle of the tiny flame. Daniel pulled out his canteen and offered it to her. Their fingers brushed, and she jerked back quickly. Heat rising in her pale cheeks, he said, "Nothing." Only watched her sip. Then, a sound cut through the storm slow. Heavy crunches in the snow, too steady to be the wind, too close to be ignored. Daniel froze, his hand sliding toward his weapon. Leora's breath hitched, her eyes glowing brighter. In fear. "They are here," she whispered, clutching the blanket tightly. Her voice shook. "My clan, they do not forgive runaways." Daniel's muscles tensed, every sense alert. Outside, dark shapes moved past the tent wall, their shadows bending in the firelight. Low voices drifted through the storm, sharp, guttural, searching. Leora's hand reached for his arm without thinking, trembling as she clung to him. Daniel did not pull away. His grip tightened on his weapon, his eyes locked on the flap of the tent. The storm outside had seemed deadly before, but now the true danger had arrived. The fragile silence of the tent was about to be broken, and Daniel knew the night was far from over. The tent shook as the storm beat against it. Yet another sound rose above the wind voices, harsh and sharp. Speaking in a language Daniel didn't understand, Leora's eyes widened, glowing brighter as she whispered, "They have found me." Her fingers clutched the blanket like a lifeline, her whole body trembling. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hand moving to the old rifle lying across his lap. He had hoped the storm would hide them, but now heavy footsteps crunched closer. Circling the tent, a shadow brushed past the canvas, pausing, listening. The small flame in the stove flickered, as if it too felt fear. The tent flap shifted suddenly, snow blowing inside, for a single moment. Daniel saw two tall figures outlined against the storm. Their armor glinted, their eyes cold and merciless. One of them barked a word, pointing at Leora. She gasped and shrank back, her body pressing against Daniel as though to disappear. Before the soldier could step forward, Daniel moved. His rifle cracked with a burst of fire. The tent filled with smoke, and one of the intruders fell into the snow. The other roared, slashing forward with a blade that gleamed like ice. Daniel shoved Leora behind him and blocked the strike with the rifle's stock. The metal groaning under the force, they struggled in the confined space, the alien soldier's strength pressing down on him. Daniel gritted his teeth and drove his knee upward, knocking the enemy back just enough to pull the trigger again. The blast lit the tent like lightning, and the second soldier fell, his armor sparking in the snow. Silence crashed down, broken only by the endless storm outside. The smell of smoke lingered, and the thin walls of the tent shivered as if they too had felt the fight. Leora crawled forward, her hands trembling as she touched Daniel's arm. Her glowing eyes shimmered with fear and something deeper. "Why? Why do you fight for me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel's chest heaved with ragged breaths, his rifle still warm in his grip. He looked at her, the fragile girl who should have been left to die, and shook his head. "Because you deserve to live. That's reason enough." Her eyes filled with something she had never known before. Hope, fragile and uncertain, but alive. The storm outside raged on, but inside the tent, a different fire had begun to burn, one that would not be easily put out. The storm did not pass that night, or the next. It wrapped the land in endless white, the winds shrieking like wild beasts. Daniel and Leora remained trapped inside the small tent, sharing what little warmth and food remained. The bodies of the soldiers he had killed were already buried beneath the snow outside, hidden by nature's hand, but both of them knew more would come. Daniel's arm was cut from the fight, blood staining the sleeve of his jacket. He tried to ignore it, tightening a strip of cloth around the wound. Leora's glowing eyes followed him silently before she reached forward. "Let me," she whispered. Her touch was gentle, her hands shaking as she bound the wound more carefully than he had. Daniel watched her, surprised by the tenderness in someone who had been abandoned by her own people for days. Survival became their rhythm. They melted snow for water, shared rations that grew smaller each meal. He taught her how to stack the packs to block drafts in the tent, how to feed the flame of the tiny stove without wasting fuel. She listened closely, copying every movement. And when she succeeded, a small smile would flicker on her lips, rare and fleeting, but enough to warm him more than the stove ever could. At night, when the cold grew unbearable, they lay close under the single blanket. At first, Leora had kept her distance, stiff, as if she feared him, but slowly the tension in her body eased. She began to rest her head near his chest, her breaths syncing with his. Each night the silence between them grew less heavy, filled instead with quiet laughter, whispered questions, and stories of worlds far away. Daniel told her of earth-loved blue skies, green fields, and oceans so wide you could not see the end. Her eyes shone with wonder as he described it, as though she could see those colors through his words. In return, she told him of her clan, of how strength meant everything, and weakness was a curse. Her voice broke as she admitted how they had left her to die. Daniel reached out, his rough hand covering hers. "They were wrong," he said, firmly. "You're not weak, Leora. You're alive, and that's stronger than anything." Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken against the law of her people, and she wanted desperately to believe him. But the fragile peace they had built could not last. One night, as the storm eased for the first time, a shrill sound broke the silence. Daniel sat up instantly, recognizing the signal. A distress beacon pulsed in the distance, carried faintly through the icy air. It was not human, and it was close. Leora's face drained of color. "They will come," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not two, not three, but many. They will not stop until they take me." Daniel gripped his rifle, his jaw tight. "Then we'll be ready." But deep inside, he knew this was more than he could fight alone. The storm had trapped them together, but soon it would clear, and when it did, an army would follow. Leora looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with fear and something else, something unspoken. She leaned closer, whispering as if her words themselves might be stolen by the wind. "If I stay with you, I can never go back." The tent fell silent, the storm outside fading, but inside, the true storm had only just begun. The morning came with a pale gray sky, the storm finally quieting, but the silence outside was worse than the howling wind. Daniel unzipped the tent just a little, his breath fogging as he peered out. The snow stretched endless and white, but in the distance, faint black specks moved soldiers. Many of them, their armor gleaming faintly under the cold light. "They're coming," he muttered, zipping the flap shut again. His rifle felt too light, his pack too empty. They had little food, little fuel, and almost no chance if they stayed where they were. Leora sat in the corner, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, her glowing eyes watching him. Daniel crouched beside her, drawing a rough map in the frost on the floor of the tent. "There's an ice cavern a few kilometers east. If we can reach it, we might hold them off, maybe even lose them in the tunnels." His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes carried the weight of the risk. Leora's fingers tightened on the blanket. "If I run with you, I am no longer one of them. I will be hunted forever." Her voice trembled. "But not from the cold. My clan will never forgive. They will kill me and you." Daniel looked at her firmly. "You already made your choice when they left you to die." He leaned closer, his voice low. "Do you want to go back to people who threw you into the snow? Or do you want to live?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She thought of the nights in the tent, of his warmth, of his voice telling her stories of oceans and skies. She thought of the way he had stood in front of her, fighting soldiers. Twice his size, his people would not abandon her. His people would call her life precious. Her heart ached with something she had never felt before: hope. The crunch of snow grew louder, closer. Shadows moved against the tent walls. Daniel grabbed his rifle, signaling her to stay behind him. The tent flap tore open with a gust of freezing air, and soldiers poured in, weapons gleaming. Their voices barked in unison, demanding she return. Leora stood frozen, her heart racing. Her people's eyes burned with fury. They shouted words she had heard all her life: weak, unfit, shame. Her hands shook, but then Daniel's voice cut through their hatred. Strong and certain. "She's with me." Time slowed. Leora's chest rose and fell as she looked between the faces of her clan and the man who had carried her from death. Her choice burned inside her, heavy but clear. She stepped to Daniel's side, her trembling hand slipping into his sleeve. Her voice rose, louder than the storm outside. "I belong here now with him." The soldier's eyes widened with rage, and in that instant the fight began. Blades clashed, rifles cracked. The air filled with smoke and snow. Daniel fought like a cornered wolf, every strike fueled by the promise he had made. Leora, once trembling, now stood with him, grabbing a fallen weapon, her hands shaking but her aim steady. Together, they stood back to back in the chaos. The tent tore open, the storm's remains sweeping in, but neither of them faltered. It was not just survival now, it was a declaration she had chosen. And with that choice, their fight became one. The frozen world itself seemed to hold its breath as to against many refused to break. The battlefield was silent now, the snow swallowing the bodies of those who had come to take her back. Smoke drifted from the barrel of Daniel's rifle, his breath ragged, his arms heavy with exhaustion. Beside him, Leora stood trembling, the weapon she had taken from the fallen slipping from her grasp. It clattered into the snow, and she sank to her knees, her glowing eyes wide with shock. Daniel lowered his rifle and knelt beside her. His gloved hand brushed snow from her hair, her face pale against the gray sky. "It's over," he whispered. Though even he was not sure if it truly was, she stared at him, her lips parting as if to speak, but only a small sob escaped. The storm had ended, leaving the world still and frozen. The tent, torn and battered, leaned against the snowdrifts. Barely standing, Daniel guided her back inside. Setting her gently on the blanket they had shared for nights, he lit the last of the fuel, the blue flame flickering weakly, its warmth spread slowly. Fragile, but real. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, but not empty. Leora reached out, her cold fingers brushing against his hand. Her voice broke when she finally whispered, "All my life they told me I was nothing. Tonight, you gave me everything." Daniel's throat tightened. He had saved her because it was right, but now he realized it had become more. He looked into her glowing eyes, seeing not fear, not weakness, but strength. She had stood with him when she could have run. She had chosen him when it meant giving up everything she had ever known. "On that frozen night," she whispered, leaning close, "you gave me more than life. You gave me forever." Her words trembled, but they carried a weight stronger than steel. Daniel's hand closed over hers, rough and steady. "Then forever's what we'll have," he said quietly. Outside, the snow kept falling, endless and cold. But inside that broken tent, warmth spread between two souls who should never have met. In the galaxy's eyes, they were enemies, impossible together. Yet in that frozen wilderness, a human and an alien girl had found something greater than survival. The storm had tried to bury them, her people had tried to break them, but nothing could erase what had begun in that single tent. From that night onward, no matter how the galaxy judged them, she was his, and he was hers, forever.